Let's jump into it. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for attending this Bicky hosted fireside chat. I'm Abhinav Kapoor. I'm the founder and CEO of Bicky. We are a customer data platform for restaurants. We're going to get to what Or'el's definition is. I'll give you mine first, but we basically aggregate guest data across silo channels like point of sale, online ordering, loyalty, reservations to map the entire guest footprint, to give you a single unified view of every guest to reveal what, when, where, how often, and how much a guest is ordering. This empowers marketing, finance, and ops teams at the restaurant to better understand guest behavior and measure the impact that guest behavior is actually having on the business overall. That's me, and I want to welcome Or'el Anbar from Just Salad, Director of Analytics at Just Salad. He's an experienced restaurant industry technologist, and in his current role, he works closely with marketing and finance teams to identify areas where investing in technology, like a CDP, is a worthwhile investment, and how it actually improves the guest experience and strengthens brand loyalty. We got a lot of questions leading up to this on how CDPs actually improve guest frequency, guest retention, guest revenue, guest lifetime value. That is absolutely, I would say, the number one benefit of a CDP, and something that I know Or'el is happy to share more on. Just a quick housekeeping, this is a fireside chat. What that means is it's going to be a pretty loose, if you joined our loyalty one last month, it's pretty loose, pretty unstructured. We do have some set questions that we can and probably will deviate from at certain points. We're going to do about 30 to 35 minutes of just Or'el and I chatting about his journey in why he picked a CDP, identifying what a CDP is and how he implemented it, what the benefit is. And then we're just going to open it up for questions. So like I said, very loose fireside chat. And with that, we will dive right in. Or'el, thanks for joining us. I'm happy to host you here and have you as part of the Bicky webinar network, so to speak. So
yeah, thank you so much for welcoming me, Abhinav. Yeah, I work at Just Salad as Director of Analytics. I'd say my core job function right now is just focusing on better understanding our customers, and a CDP is the most central piece of technology to that entire workflow. So I'm excited to kind of get into more detail on this call.
That's awesome. Yeah, and before we actually dive into, I guess, what a CDP is, just to set the context, can you give background of who you are, what you do, how long you've been at Just Salad, and maybe the 30,000-foot view of what your job actually entails?
Totally. So I've been at Just Salad for about 2.5 years. Right after I started, COVID hit, and that really disrupted where the restaurant industry was at. The restaurant industry is so high touch. It has a lot to do with kind of like the intuition of the operators and their relationship with customers. And I think COVID really turned a lot of that on its head, because all of a sudden transactions all went online. And in that moment, I think we were all kind of looking around to figure out, okay, what's the online equivalent of understanding our customers intuitively? And that requires technology. And so at the same time as we were trying to understand our customers, we were also trying to improve our online ordering experience, and we were launching an app. And we needed to understand like what specific tech products are worth bringing into the fold for us so that we can properly administer this new app rollout and understand our customers. If we're investing so much in our technology to improve the ordering experience, we need to collect the data that's required to optimize that ordering experience down the road. And so that's really been the journey for the last 2 years. And now I'd say we're on the other side of building a lot of that technology and are starting to benefit from doing so.
Yeah. So, and then that's a good segue, because, we went into this world where the restaurant business went from an in-person, people-driven business to 100% digital business because of shelter-in-place orders, to some weird hybrid mix as things started to open back up. And now, thankfully, as we start to get on the other side of the pandemic, you're seeing, at least with the large delivery platforms too, you're seeing a slowdown per se, and you're seeing the business shift back to not totally hybrid, but more in-person and more experiential versus just digital. So what throughout that process in those 2 years we've been with the brand, would you say has changed dramatically? And then what's stayed the same, or what's coming back from, at least the pre-COVID days?
I'd say, yeah, we definitely saw our sales mix go way heavy onto the digital side. Now it's moving back to be more balanced in store and digital. And I think the thing that's changed the most is now we have a real appreciation for our technology and how it can help not just with online transactions, but also offline transactions. So that's all in-store transactions. And hopefully we can benefit from, kind of pairing those data-driven insights with the more kind of operator-driven intuition, so that we can continue to offer guest quality experiences.
Right, right. That makes sense. And then a nice segue into our next question, which is, the title of the webinar, which is, what the fudge is a CDP? How do you define it? How do you think about it? You talked about it a little bit, but it'd be great to get your holistic view on what a CDP actually is.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I'd say when I first started kind of investigating this, I was having a hard time understanding the difference between what a CDP is, understanding what that is relative to just like a general data warehouse. And yeah, I was like probably two and a half years ago, Googling like CDP, like what does that even mean? And now having worked with one for a while, I really understand what's distinctly different about it is that it helps to ingest data from whatever source you have data available and then put it into a unified customer view. So the anchor for any like data structure within a CDP is always a unique identifier associated with a customer. And so that gives you the ability to follow your customers through various channels, various like points in their lifetime and render insights from that.
Yeah, I'm going to share this. This is something that we were talking about prior, right? Which was like, this was sort of the old tech. This is not the Just Salad. This is just a generic tech stack. This is not the Just Salad tech stack per se. But I think what's interesting when we were talking about this earlier is like, this is our representation of the world pre-CDP. How well does this map to what the Just Salad tech stack, without going into super specific detail, but how well does this map to at least the organization of the Just Salad tech stack and the different guest touch points prior to having a CDP?
Yeah, I think this is super representative. For Just Salad, this is similar to where we were years ago, but it's also similar to where a lot of restaurant companies are today or moved away from recently. And I think the thing that characterizes this that's particularly painful and inefficient from an investment perspective is all the point-to-point integrations. Like you've got, I don't know, is there 5 arrows pointing just at par there? And that means you're putting dev work into each one of those hours.
Right.
CDP really helps to mitigate a lot of that.
Right. And then this is kind of like the future world or like the current, I guess, again, representative tech stack, not just Salad specific, but this is kind of like the current world. I think the thing that I want to hone in on that you talked about a little bit was these different guest touch points. Loyalty is such a small, especially as your business mix shifts back to in-store and delivery balance and not pure digital anymore. What are you actually doing, or I guess, what's the level of guest data coverage that you have now versus what you had pre-COVID, when the tech stack was super fragmented like this?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say pre-COVID, where we had the most information was from customers that transacted on native digital. And even though that still remains mostly true because we're watching what those customers are doing at every point of interaction they have with our website, we were making a lot of our decisions, and most restaurant companies are making a lot of their decisions based on what that small cohort does. And so I think you bring up loyalty, it's another good example. Like if you can get people to opt into your loyalty program, that's great, but a loyalty program with a penetration of like 20% is super successful. And if you're using 20% of your customers to inform decisions about all your customers, then you're probably leaving some opportunity on the table. And a CDP really helps you to kind of like gain some of those like basic metrics that you need to understand every cohort of customers for every cohort of customers. So that includes not just native digital, but also offline transactions and for a little bit third party. And so where Just Salad's at right now is we understand our customers from an in-store perspective. We understand our customers from a native digital perspective. So that's both web and app. Right. And we have very, very limited with third party because that's mostly, Grubhub and Uber Eats, and those players are going to keep that to themselves. But
yeah. I think the thing that really sticks with me is something we talked about. I think this was like a couple months ago, where it was like, you and most brands use the 20 to 30% that's in these bottom two, right? Native ordering and loyalty to inform business decisions for 100% of guests. Or you go the opposite way and you only optimize those specific channels. And then, like you said, you leave a lot of opportunity on the table. Are you pulling in, or like what sorts of data are you pulling in from the POS? Because I think it's very clear when you think of a CDP, CDPs originated in the e-commerce world where, if you run a Shopify store, you're going to get 100% of guest data anyway. But when you're adapting CDP to a brick and mortar business, what kind of data are you getting and tracking from something like a point of sale platform where it's not a third party that's going to hide it from you, but you would assume that there's more accessibility to that data there and to tracking guests there?
Yeah, no, you've got to get creative with using your offline data. So, I think this is probably the biggest learning curve for Just Salad, was trying to figure out, okay, we know most of our customers are going to transact offline. How do we learn about those customers? Because online ones is they're low-hanging fruit. So from our POS, you get all the order information. So what's in an order, the order ID, the location, all the financial details. And depending on what your payment provider is, your payment gateway, you can get some partially masked credit card data or maybe a token or something. And that's really where the opportunity starts to arise, where you can start to collect various bits of information that indicate this is just one customer who's shown up multiple times, and then start to build a legitimate contact card around them and measure things like how frequently they come, how recently they've come, et cetera.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So now going back to, I told you we were getting off topic, and none of this, the last few minutes was in our script, but going back to that ties in really nicely with like, what was the actual question that prompted you to say, now it's very clear to me to be like, the tech stack is a mess. There's a ton of point solutions. I need something that streamlines all of it. And that is a very tech-centric, analytics, CIO-driven way to think about a CDP. But theoretically, you want everybody in the organization to be bought in on needing a CDP. So what was the actual overarching question? What were the metrics that you didn't have insight into, or that you were trying to figure out, that you felt like the CDP was the right thing that could stitch this data together and then deliver those insights for you?
The metric we really want is CLV, and we're always after improving.
Can you expand just so everybody knows CLV? Yeah.
Customer lifetime value. So the metric that we're really after is customer lifetime value, and we're always after improving our customer lifetime value insights. So the reason we want customer lifetime value is because within that, you've got a couple levers you can pull to increase sales. So you can increase frequency, you can increase lifetime, so you increase retention, and you can increase the average order value. And if you know what that is for your offline customers, that's a huge win for restaurants. And I don't think that that's industry standard, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, again, it goes back to, it's just so funny to me that a business that is rooted in knowing its guests and understanding its guests doesn't have the insight to actually understand its guests at a fundamental level. And that's not through any fault on the operator's part. It's just like you saw it before, the tech stack's just a mess. And some of these integrations just weren't possible previously. And smart people with a focus on analytics weren't necessarily in the hiring budget for restaurant brands. So that's super interesting. And then, so you talked about improving those metrics, talking about lifetime value, understanding frequency, understanding check size. Can you give, like, just summarize it? We've been talking really like in theoretical in terms, but can you give an example of like one initiative recently where, everyone cross-functionally leveraged the insights from a CDP or the data from a CDP to improve one of those metrics?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I can provide two examples. One's probably more kind of intuitive, which is like, okay, we see that this cohort of customers, like they exhibit this behavior and they're really valuable to us. How do we move more customers into that group? So maybe it's that customers who order a specific menu item have a high propensity to get an add-on, like maybe they're less price sensitive or something. Maybe that item is like, I don't know, a particular salad that's a little bit higher on the price spectrum. If we're seeing that a lot of people that order that salad have a high propensity to get an add-on, maybe what we do is we run a bit of a promo on that salad, try to get people bought in on that flavor, and then they end up ordering add-ons more down the road or something like that. So just understanding a cohort that's valuable so that you can draw more people into that cohort is one super important example. But then if you back out a little bit, understanding CLV helps you just make smarter financial decisions too. So for example, Just Salad recently sponsored the Brooklyn Marathon, which was a super fun event. And we were able to like approach that decision with confidence because we were able to say, okay, this is how much we're going to offer in sponsorship. And this is the like number of participants in the race and the number of impressions we're going to make. And we know based on our CLV, which we're collecting in our, which we collect and are getting from our CDP, we know based on our CLV how many times we need these customers to come order from us to justify this investment. And so we weren't driving blind. And I think that opened up this opportunity to do like fruitful sponsorship.
Right. I think, and when you told me that example, I was kind of like, because we always think about, you always think about CDP and customer data as informing like a paid digital acquisition strategy, an app download campaign. But I think like, again, extending customer data to a real world, like physical world campaign, and be able to set very simple assumptions like the number of races, that's the number of impressions, right? That's, again, like for like with a campaign audience. And if we're spending X on and if we assume Y conversion rate and we spend X on the campaign, then we need X number of orders or Z number of orders to actually make back our money, and say this was worth it. What's the feedback loop like on that? When do you actually know for a real world campaign whether or not it was a success for something like that?
I think it depends on what your CLV is. So if you know that your customer lifetime is like 6 months, then I think it makes sense to assess it after 6 months to see if the number of customers that you think you acquired stayed around, and on average, like stayed around for the average length of a customer, or maybe they stayed around for more or less. They might have been opportunistic. They took the promo that you offered at the event, like at the marathon, and then they never come back again. But for the most part, that's not what happened. And at least in our experience so far, that's not what happened. The marathon was just 2 weeks ago. So we'll have to talk again in like more than 6 months from now to be able to really determine what.
Well, it's good that you said more than 6 months from now, because that means your customer lifetime value that you're so eager to figure out is actually pretty high, it sounds like. So.
Yeah. No, our customer lifetime is pretty good.
Good. That's awesome. And then so you used a promo unique to the marathon, and then you were able to basically, that's how you track the initial conversion. And then once they're in the CDP, you track their behavior on an ongoing basis. Do you do any sort of digital marketing support after that initial promo conversion, to drive a second or third visit, or is it just let's see what happens?
You totally can. And that's another way that the CDP really adds value. It's like if you see that this customer shows up for the first time ever because they got this marathon promo code, and you see what they ordered and you don't see them again for 2 weeks, you can do a reactivation campaign just on that small cohort. And that can kind of help you really squeeze every dollar out of that sponsorship investment that you made in the marathon, so that you can potentially recapture these lapsed customers that are part of this small segment.
Right.
And that's just one example. There's a lot of other things you could do as well. You might find that, these marathon runners have a healthier diet. And so you can run, specific campaigns that are focused around healthy menu selection or something like that to I don't know, be more personalized with the offerings you're giving them.
Yeah. No, it sounds like now we're talking in hindsight, obviously, of the benefits of a CDP, and it seems palpable. Just the idea, just one, to have the basic understanding of what frequency and lifetime value is, and then two, to actually have buy-in to influence those metrics through creative campaigns or even basic customer lifecycle campaigns, like the lapsed emails that you were talking about. What was it like prior to a CDP? Did you have to get buy-in internally from other team members? Did they understand what a CDP is? And if you did have to get buy-in, what was that process like? How did you clear those hurdles?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, I think the reason that I love the restaurant industry is because there's so much opportunity for tech to come in and do interesting things. Like I used to be a restaurant operator, and I totally understand like being in a restaurant, looking at the POS and being like, this is where technology ends. And I think like when we started having conversations about a CDP, our tech stack, specifically with regards to marketing, was kind of like a black box, and we didn't really understand if it was working efficiently or not. And then, when we started talking about what a CDP is, it just sounded like one more vendor we're adding without having it's not growing sales on the top line directly. It's not saving money on the bottom line directly. It's this important piece that's connecting everything together. And so we actually started referring to it internally as the connector. And the diagram that you showed, I think, really helps visualize the degree to which it really truly is a connector that sits between, it sits between like every data source you have and every opportunity you have to action on that data source. And demonstrated it in a similar way to what you have on the screen now. And then ran through all the use cases of things that we could do if we knew things like lifetime, recency, frequency, what cohorts are the most valuable to us and what characterizes them, et cetera. Getting buy-in was easy, but just getting over the hurdle of understanding that having a connector opens up all this opportunity and mitigates your opportunity cost for all the things you're not doing, I think was like the initial challenge, but it was quickly resolved.
Right. Right. That makes sense. And then, so we talked about the marketing use case. Are other folks on the team using this as well? Like, how do you think, how is finance using it, or how is ops using it? How is culinary using it, if at all?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it definitely touches every department. I think the people that actually interface with the CDP are primarily on marketing and development and product. But every department benefits from insights that the CDP renders. So one example, I think culinary is a great example because it's not that intuitive. You're like, culinary is all the way over here and technology is over here. But when we're trying to understand retention and what gives customers a great first time experience, it's great to look at what first time customers order.
Yeah.
And if you can break out your retention curves based on what a customer orders for their first time, you learn a lot about your menu. And so we did that exercise, and that was really insightful. Finance uses it all the time because it improves the assumptions that we use in our financial models and our forecasts in a really meaningful way, because we really now understand how many people are actually in our customer base and stuff like that. So
I love that. It's like we can model better because we know how many customers we have.
yeah.
Right. And we know how frequently they come, and we know how much they spend. And, it's like just these fundamental inputs. Not to say you didn't have a degree of confidence in the forecast before, but how were you actually building those forecasts before without, disclosing whatever you don't
No,
want?
totally. I mean, I've done this at other restaurant companies too. You start with sales, and then you kind of back into every other assumption that you can get from sales. And so
Right.
there are a lot of things that you can layer in to improve your forecasts. And for a long time, restaurants were getting above 90% accuracy forecasts without knowing exactly how many customers you have and how frequently they come. But there was some smoke and mirrors there. And I think that the more insights that you can get, especially with a tool like a CDP, the better. And we're seeing that improve our models. So that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. And that makes sense. And then that's such a fundamental point where it's like, and because I know this, because when I was in finance and we would build models and we didn't know the drivers of a company, we would be like, oh, they grew by X% last quarter. What did they guide to? Do we believe they can hit that? And then you just add a growth rate. You don't actually look at any of the underlying inputs of the business. So to take and I'm sure your modeling was way more precise than that. And I just pulled back the curtain. I pulled back the curtain on how much of a sham Wall Street could actually be sometimes, but that's another topic for another day. But to your point, you're not looking at the inputs of the business. And now that you have the data and you understand who the customers are, you can actually, do a bottoms up model instead of just top down. That's probably rooted more in historical performance and bias, as opposed to again, how do you drive future performance if you even start to change some of the assumptions? Like, what happens if we bump lifetime value? What happens if we bump frequency? What's the flow through in the model after that?
Yeah, that's super true. And I'd say I don't want to discount everything that's using this older version models. I mean, seasonality is still important, and churn is still important, and all those things that are churn, I guess you get from your CDP now, but all those things that you used to use are still helpful. But when you're out of the gate with a super, super strong assumption that you can get from your CDP, which isn't really an assumption, it's an actual based on how many customers you have and how much they spend, then you're already starting in a way better place.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. What was your buying process like for a CDP? How did you look at the different vendors? How did you settle on, and for the record, Just Salad is not working with Biggie. The reason we wanted Or'el here is because he's one of the leaders in the space that is out in front of this. So it would be great to understand it sounded like it was a 2-year process from start to finish. Which sounds pretty extensive, but what was that process like? How do you evaluate the different vendors? What were you looking for, and what do you think of them?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely started from the customer perspective. We were like, what type of communication do we want to have with our customers? We knew that there was a lot of opportunity to improve communication with customers to be more personalized. And then we started working our way back from there. Okay, in this communication, what do we want to offer them? And then we were trying to figure out from more of a finance perspective, how much can we afford to offer these customers before we start losing money? And that's when we started to hit some serious hurdles, which was okay, if we have no idea what percentage of these customers are actually going to show up and convert, and what the retention is for various cohorts within the groups that do convert, then how do we understand how much we're supposed to be investing? We're always going to have to go to the lowest common denominator. And so there's some opportunity that you're leaving on the table there. And so we had talked to vendors that helped us with, like, loyalty vendors who could help us with like administering those types of incentives. We talked to personalized messaging vendors like the Klaviyo's and the Brazes of the world. And as we worked our way back, we just started to like scope out what working on any one of these projects in a vacuum would be. And it was so clear that anything we were going to do was going to be hugely enhanced if we started from the other end of the funnel, which was a CDP.
Right.
And that's when we made a pretty big pivot after pretty much talking to everybody on the marketing automation. Not everybody, but obviously we talked to a lot of different people on the marketing automation side of the business and realized definitely it makes the most sense to start with the CDP. And so that's what we did. And so that started about, we started really talking to CDPs like more than a year ago and getting set up. And the biggest hurdle was basically educating the vendors that we were talking to about how important offline transactions are to us. It was not obvious to a company that's servicing e-commerce businesses that the most important customers we have are actually offline customers because they make up the biggest percentage of our customer base.
Right.
And yeah, I think, not to just do a straight up plug for Bicky here, but that is a huge win for Bicky that like being restaurant specific, there's already kind of a build with the POS, because that's something that like we're still working to improve every day with our POS integration.
Yeah, no, well, you know, I appreciate the plug regardless. You circled back around to it anyway. I mean, so what did it take to, like, how big is your team to, like, and what did it take to actually implement this? And then, you know, if you want to do a plug for Bicky, you can after that as well. So.
Yeah, we have a couple developers. Our dev team ebbs and flows depending on what functions we're planning on releasing given releases, but we never have less than 2. We have a product team of 2 and in some analytics, like analysts and myself that support. But you know, I think of the people that own it internally, there's 3 people that are really focused on our CDP, and it takes a lot of our time to build it. So if you want to use that as a circle to get back to Bicky, it's true. Managing your own CDP is a lot of work.
I appreciate that. Well, so like, I guess for what are your words of wisdom then for other brands who are thinking about this process and starting this process? Where do you encourage them? Where do you encourage them to start? Right. So like, how do we help the folks on this call and the folks who are going to see this take the 2 years and compress that into 1 year or 6 months? Like, you know, where do they start? What do they think about? What are the implications of looking for a CDP that they need to think about?
Totally. I think it starts with your data sources. Like the first thing you should do is look at where all your data can possibly come from, and maybe like take a moment then to figure out if there's an opportunity to grow the number of data sources you have by layering other programs or something like that. And then once you know the full scope of how many data sources you have, then you can be pretty selective about what CDP is the right fit for you, because those sources are the most critical part of the CDP integration. There's going to be a lot of stuff that you can always do downstream, and like the email that somebody receives, a customer receives, whether it's from Braze or Iterable or Klaviyo or MailChimp, the customer doesn't know the difference. But any CDP will probably have an integration to like a email service provider that will service your business needs. And like, if you can focus on the sources where that's more brittle, like you can't just change where your data is coming from, right. You'll probably be able to make a more informed decision around what CDP you actually end up going with.
Right. Right. And then what about from a destination standpoint, where are you pushing the data beyond, if you are, where are you pushing the data beyond marketing right now?
Beyond marketing, I'd say it's mostly being pushed to analytics. I think the other real value add is that since it's all in one place, you can push it anywhere you need to. Right. So in the past, like if you look at that first diagram that you'd shown, like there's all those arrows pointing in so many different places, and those end-to-end integrations are super painful. And if because of a specific use case of a campaign you want to run or something, you need, like looking at this for an example, like you need Meta or the Instagram icon that you have there to be talking to your Twilio that you have there. That could be like a whole painful amount of work. But if you're working with the CDP, then it's not. And yeah, exactly. And so if you're working with the CDP, then it's not. So high level, I'd say the two most obvious places where you'd be sending data from a CDP is in marketing automation technology. Like it could be SMS, email, push, whatever.
Right.
Or it could be to like some programmatic marketing thing that you're doing on social media or otherwise.
Yep.
And the other place you would push it is to analytics. But you really like, sky's the limit. Once it's in one place, it's so much easier to push somewhere else.
Right. Right. And then what are you using for analytics then today to do analytics on top of the data? Is that just pushing to something like Excel, or do you have a BI tool in place? What's that part?
Yeah, we're vetting BI tools now. I think BI tools are expensive, and they're another one of those things where it's like, okay, how specifically are we going to turn this subscription cost that we're going to pay for this BI tool into monetary gains for the business?
Yeah.
So,
do you do that analysis internally? Like, is there actually are you looking at every tech vendor and you're looking at the expense, and then are you actually quantifying like the ROI? Are you backing into that ROI?
100%. Like we would first look at all the vendors, select the features that matter most to us. And the reason those matter most to us is because we think they'll be able to make a material difference in our business. Then we create like a list of the associated prices for any one of those vendors. And then we have to come up with some sort of assumption around what type of return, like what type of sales we're going to be able to drive with these insights to be able to get to an ROI. And so with the BI tool, that can be pretty hard to do because usually you're able to get to the insights that you need ad hoc through just doing some work. And so I think that's worth factoring into the decision as well, like how much time you're saving by using a BI tool. But ultimately, paying for a BI tool is harder to justify than paying for a CDP, I guess is what I'm saying. We're using Mixpanel for analytics for our website, which is important because we need to be able to track what the customer's actually clicking on and that kind of stuff to optimize our product. And so there's clear learnings that translate directly into sales because we can increase our conversion rate if we know what customers are doing once they're in our app universe. But beyond that, to get to like a place of insights across every aspect of the business, I think there's a lot of opportunities to select a BI tool. And honestly, I wish BI tools were just a little bit more affordable, I'd say.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, and then two last ones for me, and then we'll take it to some questions that were pre-submitted, and then also open it up for folks to ask questions. So now that you have the CDP, is the BI tool the only part of the stack that you feel like's missing, or is there something in your tech stack transformation aside from analytics that you're looking to take down now that you have the CDP in place?
I'd say, every day we're trying to think of ways that we could use now this like treasure trove of data to the business. So who knows what we'll come up with next. The BI tool is, I'd say it'll make everybody's life easier, but it's also not super, super urgent because we have the ability to like read in whatever data we need into some sort of like ad hoc analysis. You can put stuff in spreadsheets if you need to. You can put stuff into like Python script or whatever you're going to end up doing your analysis in. So
that ties into like my last question, which is like, what is the future of Just Salad look like now that you've got this into place? And how else are you thinking about, like, what are the ways you're thinking about using the data to improve the business?
Yeah, I think like one of the things that the CDP affords you is the opportunity to really work smarter, not harder. So like to be able to do set it and forget it marketing that works because it's automatically tailored to the way that the way that your customers are behaving. So when customers move between different buckets that you've predetermined based on what value you need to get from each one of these cohorts, you're able to like tailor the amount of incentive you're offering them, the frequency that you're messaging them, and all that kind of stuff. And once you set it up once, if you have the logic in place, then it can run. And as long as it's running, you should see your frequency improve incrementally over time. And so I think that's really, now that we finally are in a place where we're like, great, we have a CDP, we have a strategy around like how we want to communicate with our customers. We're working on just building out this logic and optimizing this logic so that, it can be hands off and we don't need a bunch of people who are manually adjusting it.
Yep. Okay. That makes sense. All right, cool. We're going to move on to a couple questions that were submitted beforehand. And we also thank you, Valerie, for the question. We'll make sure we answer that one as well. What are some examples of how restaurants are leveraging a CDP to drive sales or frequency? I'm happy to give an example of something that we do at Bicky for our partners, but to circle back to something you mentioned was that example of sponsoring the Brooklyn Marathon and really using it for one, customer acquisition, brand new customer acquisition through a promo code, and then two, retention and frequency through ongoing marketing and understanding, again, like measuring true customer lifetime value. Is there any other kind of real world examples you want to share beyond that from the Just Salad side?
Totally. I mean, I think when we're looking at trying to understand frequency, we just start breaking things out based on, is it the location that they're ordering from? Is it their age? Is it how much they spend? Is it average order value? And then we look for whatever the trend is. It could be what they order. And if we find that, that these customers who spend less come more frequently, then we know that, okay, like we've got really valuable price sensitive customers that we need to be targeting. And so if we can kind of move people out of maybe the price tier right above and try to bring them into a price tier below, but get them to come twice as often, like that's a huge win for us. So, that's an example. Yeah.
And then I'm going to pull up something here quickly, which is something that we look at. Now, this is anonymized data from our internal like CDP analytics offering, but essentially, we for one partner, we've helped them plot all of their locations based on how good they are at new guest acquisition versus existing guest retention. And so you split everything into 4 quadrants. And if something's in the top right, it's great at acquisition and great at retention, you can leave it alone. If something is in the bottom right, it's great at retention, it's great at acquisition, bad at retention. And so it's potentially an operational problem. And you can go in there and talk to the ops team and diagnose what's actually happening with that location. If something's in the top left, it's great at retention, but bad at acquisition. And so that is maybe a signal to your marketing team to dig in there and put more local dollars and do more local store marketing to drive brand awareness and net new customer acquisition. And if it's in the bottom left, it's an underperforming store. It's bad at acquisition, bad at retention. I think so many of the examples we hear of, how do you look at underperforming stores today? How do you look at the quality of your menu items and what's selling? The answer always comes back to, I look at sales. I look at what stores are performing the worst from a sales standpoint. I look at my P mix and I look at what's selling. And what I always say to the folks we work with is like, looking at sales is like looking at just a snapshot of someone in the end zone after they scored the touchdown. It doesn't tell you anything about the play that it took to get you to the end zone in the first place, right? And then saying like, oh, we're looking at sales and we're just going to put more local marketing dollars behind it. That's like running the same play over and over and over without any context of how far you are from getting to the end zone, period. And so what we always say is like, let's go beyond just looking at sales, that top level, and to something you said earlier, Or'el, which is like, let's get to the inputs of the business and figure out what's actually driving this performance in the first place. And then we can actually diagnose the business, and then we can actually figure out what's going right or wrong and then improve it. But yeah, that was a really good question. Anything you want to add on top of that?
No, I'd just say you could basically put any criteria into that that diagram that you just showed. It could be stores. It could also be menu items.
Yeah, that's another big one we see. It's like, what menu items drive trial and retention, trial and churn. And it's like, again, it's like the same thing. People are like, oh, I look at the P mix and our buffalo wings are selling. I'm like, cool, maybe that's your best seller, but no one comes back after they order them. Do you actually know? And the short answer is like, most brands don't. Which again is not to say like they're bad for looking at that. It's just most of them don't have the data, and the CDP is something that gets you the data to make these higher quality decisions. Yep. Valerie, your question actually mirrors one that we got beforehand, which was how long in terms of weeks and months, and what types of resources did it take for you to complete the integration and implement the CDP into your existing tech stack? So if you just look at the implementation time from selecting the CDP you're working with to it going live, how long was that process? And then in terms of number of people or overall resources, how would you quantify that?
Yeah, I mean, getting a CDP set up is really like 2 phases. One phase is implementation, like by getting all the sources in there. Second phase is activation, by actually connecting it to destinations where you'd want to use this data. So an example of implementation is like getting your POS data into the CDP, and activation is sending some data to a email service provider that'll like send messages out. So for us, it took about 3 months to get our CDP set up, but we had one developer who was fully committed to working on it, and myself who was project managing it, and with the support of our CDP's like customer support team. So yeah, I'd say about 3 months.
Yeah. And then shameless plug for Vicky, we do all that for you.
Yeah.
That's the benefit of like, is something we didn't touch on, but one of the benefits of being a restaurant specific CDP is like we try to be as plug and play as possible with the integrations, with the connectors to your destination sources for marketing, and the BI analytics functionality on top, which I just shared as well. So
yeah, totally. And I'd say, I mean, like I said earlier on the call, we're now integrated and we're connected to a lot of activation tools, but the BI is the last piece of the puzzle and the hardest thing to justify spend for. Like, additional shameless plug for Vicky, so cool that you throw in the BI tool as a part of the CDP.
Yeah. One question from Neil. Thank you for submitting this. When you talk about customer lifetime value, how do you define lifetime? Are you going back a certain number of years to figure out how many times a guest has visited, or is there another way you've defined it?
That's a good question. I think that's a really good question, because the like traditional like mathematic way to define lifetime would be to use some sort of like retention. And so then you have to have like a predetermined period of time that you would want to consider your customer lifetime. And you don't have to do that. And that's never going to be perfectly accurate. Like, that's layering assumptions on assumptions, which is fine for some models, but you don't have to do that with CDP. You just look at the number of orders that a customer's placed and what the date difference is between their last order and their first order. So that the lifetime is a moving target. It always changes. Because customers are, not all your customers stop ordering one day. So it's always changing. And all you have to do is count the number of orders and the elapsed time between the first and last.
Right. Great question, Neil. Thank you for that. And then one thing that we do at Bicky is with some of our POS integrations, we can actually go back historically. And so we have partners, when we get them up and running, we're going back 3-4 years to pull the historical data so that you're not just starting from scratch, right? It's like, again, you turn on the integration, there's a process to actually work through and clean the data and structure the data. But, we're giving you a record of theoretically all of your historical transactions, which can be messy, actually. That's a good counterpoint, which is, how do you actually look at the quality of the data given the disruption of seasonality, COVID, and now like COGS inflation? How do you actually determine like what's a clean baseline given the past like 2 years of just what I would imagine is just like truly noisy data and probably quote unquote not standard guest behavior?
Yeah, that's another good question.
That's a separate webinar.
No, that's
a separate fireside chat.
Man, I'd say it's not easy, and you definitely have to do it differently for every business. But the best thing to do is probably look at it over time. Like, look at a time series trend for average order value. Look at a time series trend for, retention for a specific cohort. And, if you're changing your prices because of inflation right now, you don't necessarily want to give yourself credit for, increasing average order value by doing anything specific with customers. Like, maybe give yourself credit for not losing customers when you raise your prices, but
yeah, that's interesting. And too, like, as we've been talking to more and more folks. Like, we were at Food on Demand last week, and like inflation and taking price was such a big topic. And one of the, one of the analyses that we've been spitballing with folks is, if we pull a historical baseline and we actually know what your average check size is at a location level, then, and we know what your average monthly guest count is at a location level, when you take price, can we just look at pre-price and post-price? Did AOV go up? The answer is probably going to be yes, because you're taking price. But did guest count go down? So like, to what effect, like how sticky is the product? How frequently are people still coming, even though you're taking price in the short term? And so again, it's like one of those things where it's like, that's a finance question, that's a marketing question, that's an ops question. But just by having the data, it helps you inform, those three, it helps you influence those three decision makers and how to plan your price taking strategy, essentially.
Yeah, totally. And I'll add on to that. Like, if you're not just applying a 3% increase to your prices across the board, but you're just moving the price of a couple items, the CDP allows you to see if all of a sudden a customer who orders item A that just experienced a price increase all of a sudden moves from item A to item B.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Because they don't want to pay for, they have got a threshold of how much you're willing to pay for lunch. Right. So understanding the elasticity is something you can do with CDP, but definitely can't without.
Interesting. That's awesome. Okay, and then the last one, this is circling back. This is the last pre-submitted question. If you have any other questions, we got a few minutes left here. Don't be shy, drop them in the Q&A portion of the Zoom toolbar. For the implementation process, did you assign any KPIs ahead of the project if you're able to the extent that you're able to share? And did you meet them? Or if you didn't meet them, how did you adjust them throughout the process?
Yeah, no, our North Star is definitely frequency. We decided that frequency makes the most sense for us because just of our business. We're not going to move AOV a whole bunch because people come to us for lunch, they eat a salad, or salads are generous portions. Like, they're moving AOV is a lot harder than some of the other things we could do. And we think we can maintain lifetime by just providing customers with quality products and good experience. So the way that we would really be able to increase CLV is by pulling the frequency lever. That was a KPI we set out with. We set a target for ourselves that we adjusted as soon as we got our CDP live, because we realized that now that we have a CDP and we understand our real frequency, we can set more precise goals. And we're in the process now of still working towards that goal, and we're ahead of schedule. So that's good.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. Okay. I'll just do one last call for any other questions. We got 1 to 2 minutes left here. Happy to take one more question if it's there. So I will pause for dramatic effect and signal my last call for questions here. And no takers. Okay. Well, for those of you who joined, for those of you still attending, for those of you who are watching this after the fact, I want to first of all thank you for being here and spending 45 minutes of your day with us learning about CDPs, guest data, and all it can unlock. I want to thank our very special guest, Or'el from Just Salad. Thank you, right? I think this is a super nuanced and interesting and emerging topic. The question I always get when I talk to folks about CDP, it's a mix of like, I've never seen my data this way before. This is amazing. And then the second question is always like, what do I do with it? And I think like having your expertise and sharing how Just Salad is leveraging this data across to basically inform numerous different parts of its business has been super helpful and insightful. And just want to thank you again for your time. So.
Thank you so much for having me. I love Vicky, and this is a great conversation. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And for those of you here, we'll be sure to send out the recording as a follow-up so you have it for posterity. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Take care.